good morning, and welcome to the Africa Weekly Talk. Today's subject on the docket is about my own Naija brother, my own fellow Nigerian brother, Emmanuel Acho, who is also the host of Fox Sports Network's Speak Sports program. And this has to do with Emmanuel Acho's scathing, harsh criticism of LSU's Reese emotional tears and crying at the podium after LSU's loss to Iowa in the Final Four of the NCAA tournament last week. And this also was met with some harsh rebuke and denunciation from fellow sports writers and the general public as well. So fellas, let's hear what Reese had to say in response to a question from a reporter about how things have been for her since they won the national championship last year. And I'll get back and dissect this whole thing. It is very, very unfortunate, but this is what she had to go through. So let's hear what Reese had to say.
Try to stay strong. I've been through so much. I've seen so much. I've been attacked so many times. Death threats. I've been sexualized. I've been threatened. I've been so many things, and I've stood strong every single time. And I just try to stand strong for my teammates because I don't want them to see me down and not be there for them. So I just want to always just know I'm still a human. All this has happened since I won the national championship, and I said the other day I haven't had peace since then. And it sucks, but I still wouldn't change. I wouldn't change anything, and I would still sit here and say, I'm unapologetically me. I'm going to always leave that mark and be who I am and stand on that. And hopefully the little girls that look up to me, and hopefully I give them some type of inspiration that, hopefully it's not this hard and all the things that come at you, but keep being who you are. Keep waking up every day. Keep being motivated, staying who you are, staying 10 toes, don't back down, and just be confident.
All right, fellas. That was Reese responding to a reporter's question about how things had been for her since they won the national championship last year. And it was out of this emotional response from Reese that also led to Emmanuel Acho's scathing, harsh criticism of her for showing tears and emotions and crying on the podium. So let's hear what Emmanuel Acho also had to say about Reese's emotional tears and crying.
Kudos to her, but here is the conversation. Ooh, America. I can't wait. That I will preemptively apologize. Pop it off, Acho. I will preemptively let you all know to turn your volumes up, get comfortable in your seats, because we're about to go there. I felt some type of way about that. I felt some type of way. And here's what I'm about to do. I'm about to give a gender-neutral, racially indifferent take. Now, if you want to say, well, Acho, cater your take based upon gender, Acho, cater your take based upon race, I will understand that. But I'm about to give a gender-neutral, racially indifferent take. Angel Reese, you can't be the big bad wolf, but then kind of cry like Courage the Cowardly Dog. Because if you want to act grown, which she has, if you want to get paid like you grown, which you are, if you want to talk to grown folks like you grown, which you did, post-game when you told a coach for an opposing team, watch your mouth. If you want to tell people, get your money up, then post-game when you take an L, you just got to take it on the chin. Nobody mourns when the villain catches an L. And Angel Reese, you have self-proclaimed to be the villain. Shout out to you, because you were the second best basketball player on the court, and it was not close. Outside of Clarke, it was you. 17 and 20. Dog. Showed up. Biggest game, second biggest game of your career. Absolute dog. But you can't, under any circumstance, go to the podium and now try to ask for individuals to give you sympathy. No one has sympathy for the villain. You painted the bullseye on your back. Why are you surprised when people shoot at you? So if you want to act grown, if you want to pose grown, if you want to talk grown, if you want to talk to grown folks grown, then you got to take the L like you grown. Because what frustrated me is when you want to be the villain, but you want to hope for sympathy like a hero. No villains in any sports get that kind kind of sympathy. Whether it was Richard Sherman in his prime, whether it was Baker Mayfield in college, whether it was Steve Smith, whether it was Aqib Talib, whether it's Draymond Green, if you want to be the villain, you don't have to take it like a villain. So the only thing I didn't like is Angel Reese's performance. It was phenomenal. But post-game, when you go to the podium and now you want sympathy, where was sympathy for all of those who you exposed your villainous towards? I don't know. That's where I was at, Shay. No,
All right, fellas. You heard Emmanuel Acho's response to Angel Reese's emotional crying on the podium after LSU's loss to Iowa. Now, fellas, I beg to differ with Emmanuel Acho's response on this. I really beg to differ on this issue. Because he said that Angel Reese called herself a villain, which is outright wrong. This characterization of LSU and Angel Reese as the villains goes back last year when LA Times reporter Ben Boach wrote an article, very harsh, despicable article about LSU, where he even described the LSU players as dirty debutants, which is a very foul word. So this is how far this thing goes back. And that was a game between LSU and UCLA in the Sweet 16. So even prior to LSU playing Iowa in the finals, in the finals of last year's NCAA tournament, the media had already characterized Angel Reese and LSU as the villains. So it was not Angel Reese that called herself a villain. It was the media that called LSU and Angel Reese the villains. And it saddens me to hear a fellow black reporter characterizing a black woman, young black female athlete, as a villain, especially taking into consideration the racial component of America when it comes to anything, whether sports or anything regards to white and black and so on and so forth. But fellas, with this issue of Angel Reese being called a villain and LSU being called a villain started way back during that UCLA LSU Sweet 16 tournament. But right after that, when Angel Reese, LSU, played Caitlin Clarke's Iowa in the finals of last year's tournament, and Angel Reese responded to Caitlin Clarke's "can't see you" hand gestures. That's what changed the whole situation about this villain and thug and all that stuff. Because when Angel Reese started showing that same hand gestures that Caitlin Clarke had been using against her opponents throughout the tournament, immediately Angel Reese also started using the same hand gestures. Can't see you. That's when it changed the whole narrative. And now she was started being tagged as a thug, classless, ghetto girl. Has no class, and even to the extent that some people were even calling her as disgrace to the game of NCAA tournament. That's how far they went against this young lady. So it's sad. Knowing the racial component of everything in America, for Emmanuel Acho to go hard on this young lady. Especially when you look at where Caitlin Clarke was, as well as Angel Reese was last year. Because at the end of the day, Angel Reese, LSU, ended up beating Caitlin Clarke's Iowa. And Caitlin Clarke had been the darling, beautiful white girl that Americans have come to love as the face of the NCAA, as well as even WNBA basketball. Pretty much female basketball in America. Caitlin Clarke has become the face of it. And for Angel Reese, a black young lady, to go toe-to-toe with America's famous, darling, popular white lady, Caitlin Clarke. That was by itself an issue from the very get-go. How dare does a young black athletic lady challenge this white, popular American face of women's basketball? And that is what Angel Reese pretty much did to Caitlin Clarke. So when people saw all that stuff with Angel Reese going toe-to-toe with Caitlin Clarke, that also went back to the old racial issues, especially with regards to young, black, powerful black women and how they are perceived. You know, how black women are perceived when they see them to be strong and going toe-to-toe against the status quo, especially when it comes to against another white woman, a very popular white woman. So definitely there's always going to be a racial component, and there is a racial component to this whole issue. And that is why when the White House invited Iowa also to the White House, they got a earful from a lot of people about why the losing team had to be invited to the White House, because it had never happened. Because usually it is only the winning team that is invited to the White House. But last year, Mrs. Biden decided to invite Iowa, all because of Caitlin Clarke. And out of that, they also got a backlash from the public. And eventually, I think they decided to withdraw that invitation. So you have to understand the racial component of how Angel Reese has been treated in the media. Yes, I get it. When you lose in a tournament, you have to stand up, and face and all of that. But she was responding to a question with regards to how things have been for her. And things have been pretty rough for her, like you heard her say on the podium. Things have been very rough for her with death threats and all that stuff. And all this goes to say exactly how a lot of white and other people in America feel about strong black women. I mean, they see this young lady as being strong and tough, going toe-to-toe against a white, popular female athlete. And they didn't like that. So they had to find a way to bring her down. So they create this characterization, narrative about her to make her look bad. And this sips through the media and goes all the way to the general public. So she's considered a villain. She's a thug. She's a bad girl and all that nonsense. And this is how the media does things, especially when they hear of or see a young black female. I mean, this was done even to Michelle Obama when she was characterized because she was strong. They had a way to characterize her as, being this kind of black woman, an angry black woman and all that stuff. So this is nothing new. This is nothing new. So to young fellow black women, I mean, this is something you're going to go deal with when it comes to you standing up toe-to-toe with other, whether in sports or in anything in America. To see a young black woman or a black woman going toe-to-toe against the status quo, they're definitely going to come after you. It is unfortunate. It's not supposed to be like that, but that's the reality, But anyway, fellas, exactly what happened was not even Emmanuel Acho's criticism of Angel Reese alone. That really got me to talk about this issue today. It had more to do with Emmanuel Acho's subsequent appearance on Vince Layden's podcast, where he talked about the emotional and generational trauma that African Americans have to go through in America that he didn't have to go through because his parents were Nigerian immigrants. And that is what really, really got me to talk about this whole issue today. So let's go ahead and hear what Emmanuel Acho had to say with regards to that. I mean, that was something I didn't expect from my brother Emmanuel Acho, but that's what he said. So I'll go ahead and play what he said with regards to that issue.
White people say, well, racism doesn't exist. I know why they say that, because I've been in them rooms when they saying that. When I kick it with black people and they're like, all white people are racist. I know why you're saying that. All the while, I have the privilege and luxury of not having generational trauma because my parents were born in Nigeria. So then my method is removing some of the sting because I don't have that sting and trying to deliver a message in a manner that people can receive. Okay.
All right, fellas. That was Emmanuel Acho again, talking about the generational trauma that African Americans face and have in America. But he doesn't have that generational trauma because his parents are immigrants from Nigeria. By the way, Emmanuel Acho was born here, so he's an American. But growing up in a Nigerian home in America, he didn't have to deal with this generational trauma of African Americans. And that's what pretty much he was trying to, and he was saying. And I understand where he was getting at, but it also sounded very condescending to the generational traumas that African Americans have been going through since the days of slavery when their ancestors was brought over from Africa. But the way he put it is what really got me on this one. Because when you talk about generational trauma of African Americans in America, then you have to go back to the days of slavery, how slaves got to this country, and how these slaves were maltreated, dehumanized, with racial antidotes, as well as segregation laws, Jim Crow laws, and everything that they had to endure with the hardship of slavery in America. So eventually, these hardships and these emotional hardships that they have to go through also ended up being passed on to their descendants all the way up to this day. So I get what he means by generational trauma. I understand that. But what I want Emmanuel Acho to understand also is that you can never have generational trauma of African Americans in America without the generational trauma that Africans also have to go through in Africa during the days of slavery. It cuts both ways. There is no generational trauma of African Americans without Africans in Africa. It's not possible. It can never happen. Because at the end of the day, the history of slavery teaches us that these slaves were captured, sold, and transported through the transatlantic slavery to the Americas. And can you imagine the trauma that these fellow African citizens in their various villages, communities in Africa have to go through, hearing that their fathers, brothers, sisters, mothers, friends, cousins have been captured and sold and transported across the Atlantic to a country that they don't know anything about. Can you imagine being in your village and hearing that alone? Can you imagine the trauma that the citizens of these people will have to go through, have to deal with, just knowing that they don't know what is next with regards to them being captured and sold and transported across the Atlantic to another country? So when you're talking about generational trauma did not start and end only in America during slavery. Generational trauma started with slavery from Africa all the way to the Americas. And the Africans have endured and continue to endure that trauma, that slavery and colonization that came after slavery have done to them. So to hear an African brother talking about generational trauma about African Americans, and he didn't have to go through that because his parents are immigrants from Nigeria, he didn't have to deal with that stink and all that stuff. I'm sorry, Emmanuel Acho. You got to go back and read your history again. Go back and read the history again. I mean, look at the traumas that brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers had to go through in Africa during the days of slavery. Can you imagine how these people were, felt just in their communities, not knowing what was coming, not knowing even whether to go to their farms or to go outside of their communities, that their people are being captured and sold and transported across the Atlantic. Can you imagine that trauma that these people have to go through? So I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry. And let's not forget also that when you're talking about colonization, which came after slavery, now you're talking about the borders that were created by our colonial masters, that divided tribes, that divided people from different tribes. Divided this tribe along these borderlines. That also ended up creating some of the civil wars that Africa came to see all the way through the 90s. And in some cases, even going on right now in the Democratic Republic of Congo. If you talk about Democratic Republic of Congo, how limbs were being chopped by King Leopold and his lieutenants in Belgium, Congo. Can you imagine the trauma these people had to go through down there? Come on. So when you're talking about the generational trauma and so forth, brother, you got to understand, Africans have been through that demeaning generational trauma for so many years, during the days of slavery all the way to today. Even talk about Nigeria, the Biafra War, all were part of the traumas that the citizens of Nigeria had to go through because of slavery as well as colonization. Because the Biafra War created so much trauma for Nigerians that Nigerians have to start traveling outside of Nigeria because of that war. They talk about the wars in Sierra Leone, civil wars in Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, what is going on in DRC, all across the continent of Africa. All these civil wars were tribalism, people fighting against each other because of tribes and so on. You have different tribes living in one country and now living in another country and all that stuff. So countries have to start supporting these tribes against the other tribes. And this is what has funneled all these civil wars in Africa and continue to do this. It's destabilization on the continent of Africa today. So when we're talking about a generational trauma, we have to understand generational trauma cut both ways. It's not just because of the African American who had to go through segregation, dehumanization, and so in America. Apartheid in South Africa. Can you imagine the generational trauma they have to go through and continue to go through down there too? So I'm sorry, fellas. I'm sorry. This is what really got me on this topic today. This is really what got me. And it's sad. But the history of Africa, when you talk about generational trauma, has contributed to the level of poverty and lack of development that these Africans go through today. Well able-bodied men were the ones that were stolen and sold into slavery. Do we know what these well able-bodied men and women could have done for the continent of Africa today? Thank you, fellows. If it's Sunday, God bless you. And if it's Sunday, Africa Weekly Talk. Happy Emancipation Day for the DC listeners. Thank you and peace and love.